Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we're going to take a journey of self-discovery to come to the realization that maybe we really just don't need an Oscar. We've already got one, Emma Stone. We don't need another one. That's right. Today, we're going to be reviewing Yorgos Lanthimos' Poor Things. We're going to start with an icebreaker question before jumping into a spoiler-free review of the film. We'll also provide a verdict and recommendation there. And then we're going to conclude the show by going into an in-depth spoiler discussion. So joining me today, as always, he rode in on his electronic horse, Laron Chapman, Cinematic Schematic co-host and award-winning Oklahoma filmmaker. Welcome to the show.
It is always a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Also joining us from the Cinematropolis and Flick Attack, Daniel Bokemper. Daniel, welcome back.
Hey, happy to be here. Also happy to report that I'm pretty sure the brain inside my head is mine originally. And
oh, snap. So we brought Daniel here because we thought, what better to talk about a film about women empowerment than Daniel Bokemper's beard?
Right. Exactly. Yes, I'm going to let it do the talking for 90% of it. It's talking right now.
It's very important to have the Daniel Beard perspective on a movie about women. That's for sure. And thankfully, filling that gap today, thank God she said yes on short notice. Chelsea Ratterman from Geek Girl Features. Chelsea, welcome back.
Hello, I'm welcome. I'm so happy to be here.
You know, it was so funny. We had planned this show before I had seen the movie. And originally we had three dudes in the cast. I'm being honest. I was Yorgos. I was like, you know what? I know I'm going to be at least interested in what's going on. I'm just going to go in blind. I'd seen the trailer once, but honestly, hadn't really thought much about it outside of seeing it in the theater. And, you book it. And then halfway through the movie, I was like, oh, crap. We got three dudes on a podcast about women empowerment. This is not right. Not right in the universe. But luckily, the universe did us a favor. And Chelsea, on short notice, was able to join us on the show today. So thank you.
Yeah, anytime.
And it's not superheroes.
It's not. Yay!
It depends on how you look at it.
I was going to say,
I mean, I guess the Ruffalo is in this movie.
He doesn't. He hulks out a little bit.
I mean, parts of him definitely Hulk out, right? Jesus Christ. Before we get into today's review, listeners, I just want to know if you're listening to the show today and you enjoy the conversation and you like our Oscar takes, or maybe you don't, you can support us by subscribing and leaving us a rating and a review on your preferred podcast app. You know, this is most relevant to Apple Podcasts. We have a 4.6 rating, guys, and I really... last time I did a call for ratings, people came and gave us 1 stars. So if you could, please kindly help us boost our rating a little bit. It would be very helpful. Apple Podcasts, you know what to do. You could also rate us on Spotify, where we have a solid 5-star rating. To break the ice today, we don't really talk about steampunk on this show a lot. And Poor Things is set in a reality. It's kind of like a combination of historical fiction and steampunk fantasy. And sometimes it's very unclear where the lines intersect. Yeah. So I thought maybe let's break the ice by asking a question. What is your favorite steampunk fantasy world and why? And I want to define for listeners, steampunk, this is usually something usually has a very strong 1800s Victorian era fashion matched with what if the world was run by steam versus electricity is kind of the vibe. So you see a lot of big pipes and machinery of sorts. Daniel Bokemper, I'll start with you. What is your favorite steampunk fantasy?
I think this counts, and if it doesn't, then I'm just going to admit that I shamelessly pounce at any time or any chance I get to talk about this film. And again, I think we're going to find this with a lot of our steampunk fantasies. Not a world I ever want to live in, but one I thought was incredible on film, and that's Terry Gilliam's Brazil. It's the bureaucratic dystopia filled with, just bizarre devices for pleasure, torture, and convenience, and it to me feels a little realer every day. And what I mean by that, this is really unfair. But every time I see like a HelloFresh or like a Factor like sponsorship on YouTube or something like that, I think of like in this film, they go to like a 5-star restaurant and like what they're serving is basically like little pellets to like emulate whatever the fine dining, whatever it is, like caviar or filet mignon or whatever it is. And I don't know. I just feel like as we get closer to these prepared, gourmet meals, and it just kind of, I don't know, it echoes Brazil to me. But yeah, just a brilliant film. Again, very, very bleak in a lot of ways, but not if you watch the American version, which is why you should definitely watch the original UK version, the extended cut, because you get
It's been released, re-released as like the director's
and
cut.
it is.
too.
And at
Yeah.
this point, you would be hard pressed to find the U.S. theatrical release. I think almost everything, and primarily the Criterion. Right now, you're going to get the UK.
I think you actually get both if you do the Criterion.
You do, but the primary film, you have to like select. You got to be like, I'm not strong enough to watch the like consciously select the U.S. version, which is weird to me. But the difference being is one has a extra 15 minutes.
It's just a fundamentally different movie.
It is,
honestly,
It ends on a severely different note.
Yeah. Yeah, it changes the entire meaning of the thing you just watched. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's Terry Gilliam's 1985 cult hit Brazil. Chelsea Ratterman, what is your favorite steampunk fantasy?
So I was gonna plug one of my favorites, Penny Dreadful. Not super steampunk, but I was like, it felt like a fifth theme.
It's definitely the time period.
I felt like it. And then I was like, oh, I could, cute little book series that I read. I loved it. But I'm actually going to, I'm going to throw out there the 2004 masterpiece starring Hugh Jackman and Kate Beckinsale, Van Helsing.
Van Helsing.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Unbeatable, just every time.
Chef's kiss.
Absolutely, multiple times. It's required viewing.
It's so easy to watch too. You know how many times I've turned it on to go like if you just like needed something on in the background or like turn on to go to sleep.
Yep.
Van
It's
Helsing.
super trashy, but it's so fun. It's
so
so fun.
good.
It's so fun.
It is the definition of trashy, but it's the definition of guilty pleasure. That
Yes.
because I love that movie and it is very bad.
Yeah.
I
God, yes.
recently watched Bram Stoker's Dracula for the first time, and then as soon as that finished up, I was like, I want to watch Van Helsing.
A little palate cleanser.
You see that's definitely the same character, right?
Yes,
Absolutely.
identical. Yeah.
Clearly.
Also, I was listening. They were talking to a podcast the other day. I can't remember which one. They were talking about the underworld movies. Oh, Trial by Content, which is a show on the Ringer that I really like. They were talking about that. As far as they could tell, that was where the whole idea that werewolves and vampires didn't like each other came from. Was that series? And Van Helsing is very derivative of the underworld series as well. I don't know if I didn't fact check that, but I just thought that was interesting. Also, that like the stake shotgun thing.
Oh, the whole thing. The little like the light thing that like explode. Like there was just a lot of weird stuff in this movie.
Do you guys remember how he killed Mr. Hyde at the beginning of that movie? The giant CG Mr. Hyde?
Yes.
Yeah,
There's a prequel. It's an animated prequel.
What?
It is about
No.
Mr. Hyde. Yes.
I have to see this.
You have to watch it. It's got Elizabeth Bathory, the countess that like bathed in all the blood.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Weird. Doesn't he fight him inside Big Ben or something? Isn't that one?
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah, I think that's
It's-
Van Helsing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, Laron Chapman, that leaves you. You got to top Van Helsing. Good luck.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, I know which one's not. Like one that kept popping up. When I did a quick Google search. Was Zack Snyder's Sucker Punch, and I've never seen a movie that was more truth in the title. In terms of how I felt after I left it, I felt like I got sucker punched. But
What a weird movie.
strange film, and I really wanted it to work because I know what it was trying to be, but it was just kind of cringy in some of its gender politics.
Well,
and-
you know what's funny, and it's very relevant on this podcast, Poor Things, where I remember at the time Zack Snyder called it his feminist manifesto, and you're like, it's not Zack Snyder, you're a white dude, you can't do
she
that.
has to gyrate sexually to get to like release her powers, and it just feels like inherently like. No, I don't think you understand. His own message doesn't work in it. But my actual choice for this is The Prestige, which I don't know if it's like straight on the nose, but it's like
See, it's technically a set in history, which would not make it the fantasy, but also they do weird magical shit in that movie, so I guess
Right.
that counts.
right,
Yeah.
and more like aesthetically, I can see it there.
Definitely.
But I get what you're saying. Yeah, time wise, probably not. But yeah, so that and that's one that, like I said, one of Nolan's unsung masterpieces. Ahead of his most recent one. But yeah, that's one that I enjoy quite a bit.
All right, I've got 3 I'm throwing out. Number 1, Howl's Moving Castle, the Miyazaki film, which is actually based on a steampunk novel of the same name, I do believe. I really, really love the way that because you get to see like the flying machines, you get to see the Victorian era castles. It's that weird thing about it's like what could have been if we weren't burning the planet to the ground, we were using steam instead. And it just seems like so bright and colorful. And the things they're able to do are really, really, there are things they're able to imagine in that film are really powerful.
And
I thought.
I feel like giant mechanical spider legs is like a distinctly steampunk thing. I don't
I think
know when
so,
that became, but,
yeah.
like, I don't know that motive.
which means Wild Wild West.
I was going to say,
Exactly.
shout out to Wild Wild
Changed
West.
mine.
Yes.
Forget Brazil. Wild Wild West.
I'm also going to throw out Matthew Vaughn did Stardust, which is a fantasy film that I think is just highly, wildly underrated. Super fun, super whimsical. The pirates, their ship is fueled by the wind. It's just a super neat reimagining and classic fairy tale feel good movie. Love it. And lastly, just because I've been in the mode lately, Final Fantasy VII. Steampunk. Oh yeah, definitely steampunk inspired for sure. And there's a lot of pro-environmental messages in that game as well. And hey, we got a new one coming out, sequel to Final Fantasy VII Remake coming out in February. So riding that high. It's a very cool lived-in world that I appreciate, with a bunch of also steampunk, but also lots of weird 90s sci-fi shit in it too. Yeah. So listeners, what is your favorite steampunk fantasy? You can let us know by hitting up the Cinematropolis on our social media channels, including Facebook, X, Threads, Instagram at the Cinematrop, or you can just send us an email at thecinemetropolis@gmail.com. Without further ado, let's get into our spoiler-free review of Poor Things.
I am Bella Baxter. I'm a flawed, experimenting person. I seek outings and adventures. Bella's so much to discover.
You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen.
I am finding being alive fascinating.
Bella.
Why I keep it in my mouth if it is revolting? I must go punch that baby.
So according to IMDb, Poor Things is described as the incredible tale about the fantastical evolution of Bella Baxter, a young woman brought back to life by the brilliant and unorthodox scientist Dr. Goodwin Baxter. Few important tidbits about this movie. This is Yorgos Lanthimos' 8th film as a director, and his first one since 2018 was a big awards favorite, The Favorite, also starring Emma Stone, Rachel Weisz, and Olivia Colman. Poor Things is based on the 1992 novel of the same name by Alistair Gray. The film stars Emma Stone, Mark Ruffalo, Willem Dafoe, Rami Youssef, among several others. And this film, Poor Things, was famous, or perhaps infamous, depending on your point of view, for winning the Golden Lion Award at the 2023 Venice Film Festival. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the awards contention here today with this film. And winning the Golden Lion's a pretty strong case. It's definitely one of those nice notches on your belt if you're running for the Oscars. Yeah. So with that said, what is your overall impression of Poor Things? What did we like? What didn't we like? Chelsea Ratterman, start us off.
So I'm honestly, we watched this movie, two weeks ago, whatever. I'm like still digesting it because there's like much happening. I loved, everybody was committed. Like everybody was so brave. Emma of all of them. And being able to set a lot of the conversation that you're having in that like fantastical setting really lets you expand that conversation that you're having with it. So I loved all of it. Honestly, it was just every piece of it I loved.
Head over heels.
Yes.
All right. Love to hear that. Laron Chapman.
I too adored this film, and I'm eager to rewatch it because I have also. It's one of those movies where you leave and you're still, again, as you mentioned, you're still processing, you're still thinking about it because there is so much world building. It is a very odd film, and it did take me, honestly, I think it took me half the runtime for it to finally, I think I said when we went to see it, for it to finally work its magic on me. But it was an aha moment more than I was never bored leading up to that. It was more so like just a lot of things it's throwing at you visually and thematically. But by the end, I felt like I was just like, once it finally possessed me, I was very much like in awe of, how beautiful the production design is, how great the performances are, and just how much it has going on in its brain, and its noggin, So it was, I think it's a triumph for Yorgos. I think that I've, to varying degrees, have liked all of his films, but I feel like this is his most hopeful film because I really think so many of his films leave me feeling a little cold. I'm always more, I more admire them than love them. this is the first one I could say that I actually felt very inspired and felt good coming out of, because I think its character, finally he found a character that he didn't just want to like cut open and, you know, see their insides. You know, it's like he actually cared about, you know, what was going on with this character. And I mean, although he did
cut her open and look at her.
He literally cut her open, but yeah, he definitely seems to be, he seems to have an affection for this particular character. So,
all right. So overwhelmingly, this side of the table really likes the movie. Daniel Bokemper.
Yeah, I will have to agree with Chelsea and Laron. And this is the case. I usually tend to respond positively to Yorgos's work. I think that disarray he establishes, I think of in like The Lobster and Dogtooth as well. I think that's his first feature-length film.
No. That's the first one people heard about.
Is it? Okay. Yeah. He does have another one, and I can't remember.
Two more before that. Yeah.
Was it the? Yeah, I remember the Alps. I can't remember if that one came after.
I think Dogtooth was just his first hit.
It was his first
hit.
Yeah. But that being said, I think the disarray he places you in. I think even the world building, even within reality itself, I think he has a strong aptitude for world building. And at the same time, I really like his stories tend to lean into characters discovering, like finding their agency despite these kind of reality breaking obstacles. And I think in Bella's case, it's kind of, you know, you have the systemic, it's like she's getting hit by like both angles. You have the systemic, you know, chauvinistic Victorian society where it's run by a lot of men who just like to kind of own things. And then at the same time, internally, you know, with her own story and sort of a like pseudo Frankenstein story that's going on there. I think it just executes that so well, and it does approach it in a way that's actually more optimistic and hopeful. I would argue that while a lot of his films end on rather bleak notes, I think, you know, some of them, again, Dogtooth and The Lobster, I think do end, in Alps end hopeful, but like obviously you've seen this person go through a lot of irreparable damage, and then in this film I think it actually it still has all of that, but it is more optimistic, and I think he did a lot to diffuse the bleakness.
It's more warm.
Yeah,
no, there's a happily ever after. This is a happily ever after.
It's a fairy, and it is a fairy tale.
Yeah,
it feels a lot more like a fairy tale by extension. And so while there's a big element of this film that makes me, you know, feel like I have to add an asterisk when I say it's like his most accessible film, but I do still stand by that, in that I think from a narrative perspective, it's a really easy watch. There isn't a lot I don't like about it. There is one like stylistic choice that I get why it's there, and I receive it well, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but I still think and it's more of like an aesthetic choice that happens about maybe a fourth into the film, maybe, and it works. Like, it still is meaningful and symbolic, but it admittedly, I wanted it to approach it in the way that some of the cinematography does, and in the way that the cinematography explains the story and explains the main character's cognitive capacity kind of widening and getting, you know, better. And as she sort of develops, I think there's one aspect of that where I think it stumbles a little bit, and not every joke landed for me, yet every line delivered by Willem Dafoe specifically, as well as Mark Ruffalo's character, I just feel like they both hit really well. And then on top of that, Emma Stone's performance, which to me feels like the best I've seen from her. Not that I've seen everything, but this feels very, very strong. So yeah, ultimately I did love this film as well.
All right. I'm going to be the naysayer at the table and say that this movie is just pretty good. I really enjoyed it. I think technically speaking, everything's working. The production design is outstanding. The score is unsettling in the right way. The performances are magnificent. Again, yeah, Emma Stone for sure. Willem Dafoe, man, he's like one of those guys that I just feel like is never going to win an Oscar, but he's doing, like, every time he shows up, he's just doing the craziest, like, monologues and swinging for the fences. And I think he does it again here. I will say Mark Ruffalo, I've really gone back and forth since I've seen the movie about how I felt about it, because I will tell you the first, like, 3 scenes he was in, I could not. Like, he's doing a thing with his voice that I just found awfully distracting. I kind of got on board with it, I guess, but it's still a weird performance, and I'm not sure I'm as crazy about it as you guys are. It does kind of work for the characters playing, I suppose, sort of greedy con man type. I like I love the undercurrent of some of the feminist ideas that we're going to talk about in the spoilers section here, that I think Laron, as you and I were talking about, seems Obviously not. The timing of this release is it feels extra timely this year for a lot of reasons we'll get into, and so all those things said, I think it's a good movie. I don't like it as much as like say The Lobster, which I think really challenged how I perceived and thought about the institution of marriage in a lot of ways. I feel like you do the same thing with Royalty and The Favorite, and I really like the story. It's really great, but it is fairly straightforward. And I think that's to the film's benefit. But in terms of my favorite Yorgos films, I really like it when I'm sitting here chewing on like an idea like 2 weeks later. This film, it posits a lot of ideas and makes a lot of stylistic choices that are like, okay, that's interesting. Let me think about that. But generally speaking, it is a straightforward story. All that said, on the accessibility note, I'm going to politely, while I agree with you narratively, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
I'm going to represent the people. People are not going to like this movie.
You're not going to take your parents to it.
My parents are going to be out in 5 minutes. There's so much sex in this movie, which again I think works, and I'm on board. We're on board at this table.
Sure.
Cinephiles who have that sort of like palate probably going to be down, but I would say the average person is not going to jive with this. Like they're going to get 10 minutes in and be like, what the hell am I watching?
And Caleb, you've got boats, you've got brothels, and you've got brains. Who couldn't love it?
I'm just saying, I just want to be very clear. I mean, Daniel, you can continue to think what you want, but I'm going to be very clear. I would never, ever, ever use the word accessible to pitch this movie to anybody. That's not like a Die Hard in the womb. I think it's the most Yorgos Lanthimos movie that he's made yet. Yeah. In the same way, and Laron and I were talking about this, it's like, you know how Asteroids, they're, again, two different styles. I'm not saying stylistically the same, but in the same way that Wes Anderson continues to become even more Wes Anderson with every project he makes, you looking at Asteroid City where you're like, wow, I love this. But this is, if you hate his isms, this movie has all of them. All of them to the max. This is Yorgos doing that with his stuff. And in some ways, I think the Lobster is a weird movie, and it's got a lot more going on in the subtext. But I feel like that's a movie I could almost recommend to certain people that are more like air quotes normies. Again, there's a lot there that I would disclaim. This movie though, there's just people I would straight up not recommend it to, because you're not gonna jive with the movie. Right. So that's to say, really good movie. I'm not super eager to rewatch it. I do like it. It ends on an uplifting note that again is a nice change of pace for the director. And as we'll talk about, timely release. I think it has a lot to say about women empowerment, women taking autonomy over their own body, like all those things. Very timely themes, and I think it's going to be well represented at the Oscars this year. Let's talk about the awards conversation, though. I mean, Laron, you and I, this is our go time, man.
Yeah, I think it'll be represented very well in terms of nominations. I think its biggest threat is going to be Barbie in a lot of the craft departments, because I think a lot of the same things that work really well in terms of world building with this, you know what I mean, are the same things that are more palatable in Barbie that are also like production design. Both of them great. You know what I mean? Like costuming, both of them great. You know what I mean? Like, but they're different worlds. You know what I mean? Like, but I feel like they're both trying to accomplish kind of very similar ideas, but with each other, in terms of this woman that's out of, that's in this kind of having this fish out of water experience and this journey to self, and again, like accessing her agency, accessing her autonomy, and in a very male dominated world, that is kind of, steering her in a different direction. And that enlightenment that she slowly gets, they have very similar outcomes too, I think, in the end, where they get to do what they want, But I think in terms of nominations, I think the one that we can count on is Emma Stone. If she's not the, unrivaled frontrunner right now, I don't know who is,
She's going to be, I'm just going to put this out there. This year, I feel like this movie is going to be my Oscar supervillain where I'm like rooting against it to win. Including Emma Stone, not because she's not fantastic.
Yeah, she's great.
She is. It's because she's already got one.
She's already got one. I agree. Yeah. I'd arguably say this is far more impressive than the one she won for.
Absolutely.
And I kind of wish there was, if she hadn't won for La La Land, you know what I mean? Then maybe this would be like a, girl, you did that thing. You know what I mean? Like, so, but that being said, I think we'll see this in picture, director, costuming, production design, score, editing, sound. So, I mean, really, I think double digit nominations. How well it's going to fare in those will, we'll see. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. So I don't think you'll have to be rooting against it too much because I don't know if it's going to win all those categories. I think it's just going to be shown a lot of love in terms of the craft department. So it definitely stands out. I'll say that. It's very unlike, I mean, at least visually,
definitely
like anything else that will likely be nominated this year. So I give it points for originality.
Yeah, yeah. Chelsea, what about you? What do you think? What do you think in terms of its awards potential?
I'm pretty much with you guys. I think it's going to see a lot of nominations. Like Laron said, Barbie, there's a lot of similarities just like visually, aesthetically, messaging wise. So I think it'll do really well at nominations. It might pick up some wins just if people are feeling like they want to lean a little more in the arts direction versus the how Barbie kind of went. But there's between Barbie and Maestro, because Hollywood really likes to reward movies about itself.
Maestro is actually, that's a good point. Maestro is actually going to be the supervillain this year.
I think just because of Hollywood's tendency to reward things about itself,
and
it's also the one that's going to.
And it also, I didn't even notice going in, Maestro was executive produced by Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg. You know what I mean? It's just like
it's built to win something. Yeah. So I think Poor Things will show up. I think it might be too odd to win. Things.
Okay, I think that's fair. The Favorite did get some love, but I would argue this movie is again a lot more.
It's a little more grounded.
Yeah. And I also feel like too, like if you look at it, like last year, and it goes both ways because the Oscars are just weird. They're inconsistent with what they favor one year versus the other, and I feel like last year was a pretty weird year. Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's a pretty weird movie, to be honest.
Totally.
But but then. They tend to go backwards the next year and do something safe. You know what I mean? So
Maestro is what you're saying.
So this is, please not. I haven't even seen it. And I'm like, don't do that.
Yeah.
Daniel, what are your thoughts on awards potential here?
No, and mostly in the same boat. Like it's going to be everywhere, and you're going to see a lot of it. But whether or not it will bring anything home, I do hope. Just because I liked the cinematography so much, and again, I think as all of us are, we're still catching up. It is top of mind for me in my favorite films of the year. But again, whether or not that plays out, and that's reflected in the awards, again, I think it will have a very strong presence. But you're right. I do think maybe we got our weird pick, and well deserving with last year too. I think we were all pretty unanimously behind it. But with Everything Everywhere All at Once, but with this year, I just see it having a very strong presence, but I don't foresee it taking home anything. And even as strong as Emma Stone's performance is, I am kind of in that camp where I'm like, well, you already got one. We don't need another one. But at the same time, I also think it's just when I think of those individual categories, it's pretty easy for me. Again, except for cinematography, this film really speaks to me there. But in case of a lot of other things right now, I feel like I've seen maybe slightly better films. That obviously doesn't always pan out in award season. But yeah, I don't see it walking away with a ton, but definitely being nominated for
a bunch,
almost everything. Yeah.
Cinematography, we're thinking Rodrigo Prieto is going to get nominated twice, once for Barbie, once for Killers. And if that's the case, those two movies could split his vote.
Could cancel
and
out.
then that could lead to a third
choice.
And
it probably is in third place in that regard.
I would say.
So,
yeah.
So there's some ways. There's some avenues where.
Well, although Hoyt von Toyma for Oppenheimer's
that's true.
That's gonna be a tough one to beat.
And there's a lot of love for Oppenheimer this year. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. They did invent black and white IMAX. That was the first film to ever do black and white IMAX cinematography. So something to be said about that. But all right, so we've got a lot of juicy tidbits to talk about in the spoiler section. But let's just really quickly get through our letter grades and recommendations. So, Laron Chapman, what letter grade would you give Poor Things?
I'm giving it an A-. There's some aspects of it in terms of length that I think pacing wise, you know what I mean? Here and there, I was thoroughly engaged, but there are moments where I did see it kind of
slow start, man. You said it earlier.
A slow start because it's really got a lot on its mind and it's really got to set a really strong foundation. So I understand why that's there, but it does take a minute to get where it's going. But when it does, I was very enthralled. So A- I feel like feels right, in that regard.
All right, Chelsea Ratterman.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it an A. I mean, everything that you're watching, everything that you're thinking about, feeling, everything is just. I think it delivers really well for it.
Awesome. Daniel Bokemper?
Yeah, mine is an A- as well. As a whole, really, really, really like it. I think it's just a relatively small editing choice that does carry out through the film, that I think there was maybe an opportunity to better mesh the narrative and the overall theme of the film with that. And it just feels abrupt. I understand why it's there, but it feels a little bit weird. And yeah, I think overall though, just the performances, again, for the most part, the cinematography, and then just the world building. And it's really funny. And on the pacing note, there was a moment I remember distinctly where I was like, oh no, this is actually going to start to like overextend itself a little bit in that final act, but it really didn't. It really, I had that fear, but then it just moves in a really nice and engaging way.
I know exactly. Once we get to that final chapter,
there is like,
okay, where
do
you're
we
like,
need one more chapter, and then, but then it was a really good one.
It really underscores, I think, what the movie was about,
and necessary. Yes, and very necessary for that character. And I think it was, it could have derailed a lot of the goodwill the film built, but I think ultimately it didn't. It found a really nice place to finally rest on. So A- for me.
A-, again, B+. I think I like a lot about this film a lot. I love certain things about this movie. I do think the world building's impressive. I think the cinematography, the production design is just kind of mind-blowing. All the technically, I think it's great. I don't think it's my favorite of Yorgos' movies. I do think The Lobsters probably still sticks out to me a little more. But again, I still think this is an extremely strong outing. I think people who know what they're in for with Yorgos are going to love it. And I think the plus is because bringing sex back to cinema, because
lots of it.
That's a loaded conversation, but I'll just say Hollywood in general has become kind of, what's the word?
Sexless.
Just
say it.
In the last decade,
yeah.
Which is kind of weird because I remember growing up, it's like, oh, Hollywood's full of sex and sin and stuff. I'm like, not really, man. Like even like the rated R movies, it's pretty rare you get like any sort of steamy sex scenes anymore. There's a whole conversation about that I don't want to get into around intimacy coordinators and all of that. It's very valuable, different conversation, very valuable tools that hopefully will enable us to do this in a more responsible
Even Nolan
way.
brought sex into a movie this year, an R-rated movie. We were like, wait a minute.
Wait a second. Nolan doesn't do that.
Didn't do that.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's just a nice thing to nod because that is a and it factors. It's essential to the story and the character. It's so essential.
It's not gratuitous in that way,
right?
You know what I mean? Like,
I wouldn't even. I would say it's very meaningful, and it's just nice though because it is a part of the human experience that I feel like, especially in America, we don't really talk about in a meaningful way enough. For the story, not only to include it, but for really to be about how sex functions as a gateway to your own humanity, I think, and your own identity, like all that stuff is pretty powerful. So that's why it gets a plus. It went from a B to a B plus because bringing sex back to the cinema. What other things would you recommend? Could be movie, television shows, novels, music, video games. Daniel Bokemper?
Yeah, I think, again, it is a very difficult, a hard watch, but I think it's a worthy one. I would encourage people to go back to Yorgos' early filmography and watch Dogtooth, his first hit, not his first feature-length film, but his first notable film.
Oh, want to clarify. Dogtooth is his third film.
Yes.
His first one is My Best Friend in 2001. Then he had another one in 2005 called Canetta. I have not seen either of those films, but Dogtooth shows up in
neither being The Alps, which is good, but I think it's after Dogtooth.
It is 2011, yeah.
Yeah, okay. But that would be to dive into Yorgos a little bit deeper. And again, I would agree with Caleb. I actually do like The Lobster more than this film. That's the one I keep thinking about. But again, we've mentioned that multiple times. I think just to go and do a hard nerd turn as far as if you want more steampunk and you want a good steampunk story, I recently caught up with both the manga and the television adaptation of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood specifically.
You watch it's just Brotherhood specifically?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, Brotherhood, which is the better one. Yeah, if you tend to talk to people will mention that as being the better.
Laron and I were just talking about anime yesterday and how confusing it can be, and that's Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is a good example of that.
It is, but yeah, if you're going to experience one of those forms of the story, definitely do Brotherhood. It's a lot more succinct. Apparently a more sincere adaptation. Well, except there's two different mangas too. I don't know, whatever.
It's the one the guy who wrote the original manga says is the better version.
Exactly, so, yes. And so I would encourage either reading or again probably watching Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. But yeah, a lot of steampunk goodness and just a really sincere story about two brothers who made a mistake and kind of have to live their lives with that mistake and are trying to reconcile with that. And I think it does it in a very mature way.
And sometimes has to hunt down 7 deadly sins.
Exactly. Yeah. And
that's a great recommend. That Brotherhood is an exceptional anime series.
Yes.
Chelsea Ratterman, what would you recommend?
So I'm actually going to recommend another piece of Emma Stone filmography with Easy A.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a flip side of really this movie and how it's dealing with women and sex and how society treats women and how their interactions with it. So different take, definitely more accessible.
We could recommend to pretty much anybody.
Yes.
Yeah, great recommendation though. Easy A, man, what a great movie. Oh man. Laron, Chapman.
So I got 3, but the ones I want to point out here are Teeth, the horror film Teeth, being one of those films that has a very feminist undertone, dealing with female agency, taking power over her own body in different ways, and using sex to make a really impactful conversation about the female experience. And it's definitely not for everybody, but I think that in terms thematically and what it's trying to achieve, very similar in that regard. I think an obvious visual inspiration for here, Bride of Frankenstein, is definitely obviously in informing a lot of what's going on in the story visually. And then I mentioned Barbie several times. I really do think there's a correlation with these two movies.
It's a great pairing.
I just think they're, just thematically, there's a lot going on similar with both of these characters. Again, one's a little bit more powerful than the other one, but I think that the journey is the same, the objective's the same, and they kind of come, I think, in many ways to the same resolution at the end.
I'm going to go, just related. Speaking of Greta Gerwig, you said Barbie. I'm going to go back to her previous film, Little Women. Every time I think about that movie, I just think of the scene when Bob Odenkirk walks in and the girls are so happy to dad. That's how my brain goes every time I think about that movie. Just such a sweet, sincere story about coming of age, a women, exceptional cast, great production design. I also want to give a shout out to an underseen film called 20th Century Women, which came out a few years ago. Kind of, you're looking at basically 3 different generations of women processing what it's like to live at the end of the 20th century. What are their experiences? What can they learn from each other? And what can they pass down to the next generation? And it does it in a very intimate way, but also was able to zoom out and look at the big picture of life and what it means to be a woman in today.
Also starring Greta Gerwig and Annette Bening.
And lastly, other Emma Stone recommendation. So there's this new show on Showtime called The Curse. Have you guys heard about
I've
this
heard
yet?
about it.
I want to see it.
I know nothing about it except that it exists and that she's in it. But
Alongside Nathan Fielder as the co-star. Are you familiar with Nathan Fielder's work? Okay. And the third thrice is Ben Safdie. So here's the Google synopsis, and I'm going to tell you how good it does or not. But Whitney and Asher Siegel are a newlywed couple struggling to bring their vision for eco-conscious housing to the small community of Española, New Mexico. But their efforts are complicated by an alleged curse and an eccentrically flawed TV producer, Dougie, that's the one played by Ben Safdie, who sees opportunity in their story. And as the series unfolds, the couple find themselves caught in a mysterious web of ethical and moral gray zones, all while trying to keep the relationship afloat and conceive a child. It's so uncomfortable.
Okay.
It's so funny. I don't know if you guys, if you're familiar with Nathan Fielder's other work, it's that kind of funny where you're like, what is going on? Oh, this is uncomfortable. And then but then you're like laughing through it. There's just all sorts
like
of
a nervous laughter or like a...
It is very nervous laughter.
Yeah. But again, here's the thing. Nathan Fielder's other work is like reality TV. So this is what makes it kind of interesting, because his others is like, how much of this is real? What's not real?
Yeah.
What kind of situations is he putting real people in? This is all scripted, but he's able to, like, the energy is the same. It's people getting in these crazy, uncomfortable conversations on the screen about really uncomfortable topics. There's also a big subtext about gentrification, which is, I say subtext, pretty textual, but like they're kind of exploring like, what is this doing to communities? It's deeply funny, guys.
Yeah.
Deeply, deeply funny. Just check it out. The Curse, it's on, if you have Paramount Plus, you can watch it via Paramount Plus, because Showtime and Paramount have combined into one app at this point. So check it out there. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our spoiler discussion for Poor Things.
It's moving. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's moving. It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. Oh,
All right, so I think there's a lot of different things we can talk about here. When you strip away the setting of this film and the aesthetic choices, Poor Things is essentially about a woman's journey to self-discovery. The adult woman begins life with the mind of a child, grows up and becomes a fully realized and autonomous person. We're obviously going to talk about the gender side of it, but I do think even broader than that is what makes us who we are. Is it our environment, or are we just intrinsically born that way? So what do we think makes Yorgos' take on this classic thing through Poor Things unique and distinct? So I'll open up a table. Chelsea?
Ooh.
Laron? Who wants to take it first?
It's a deep, methodical question.
Yes. Without trying to tie it distinctly to the gender aspect.
You
Which is hard. It's very hard to separate it.
You can feel free. Go for it.
Okay, yeah. So Yorgos takes the Frankenstein approach with this. Like, he has that aspect here. And it's really interesting because having Bella with the body of an adult and the mind of a child, how she's having to interact with the world, women have to grow up so fast, especially in relation to the sexual aspect, because they're always told, don't walk alone. That's and it's unfair.
Yes.
How the nature of our world treats women in that particular aspect. So her having the mind of a child, where she's walking directly into that with her physical aspects, and her absorbing that information and how she's interacting with it diverges from the nurture, from the social expectations, the polite society, as they drive home in this one. And it's her nature is human nature, which is the sex is natural. Sex is a part of growth, a part of expansion. It's how we interact with each other. So I think that having that separation allows her to have the natural development more so than the nurture and the social part, where she's conforming to protect herself.
She's developing on her own, actually on her own terms, not via the polite society, which represses women's sexuality in many cases. And
She actively diffusing stigma too. I think, what is the word she uses for sex while she's like learning about it?
Violent,
like furious jumping or something like that. Yeah, this works so well.
So funny.
But go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say it is hard for me to, I think, answer this question because it's difficult in my perspective to separate the
gender aspect.
Yeah, the gender oppression, because I think, like, again, I mentioned it earlier, without spoilers, you have even the, her creator / caretaker, the mostly benevolent Godwin, that's also called God, Willem Dafoe's character, who is like a Victor Frankenstein kind of crossed with Frankenstein's monster himself. He has all these visual scars. When he eats, he has to have this giant like apparatus to allow him to because he doesn't have the like digestive enzymes because his dad wanted to see.
And the belching.
And it's like this giant, when he belches, it's like this big marble-esque bubble that, which Bella finds hilarious. And then later you get, Rami Youssef's character, is it Maxwell, I think, or something? And
Max,
he's like, and he's very just disturbed by it, and I think that approach too, where you have like that very childlike, but like there's a point where because Willem Dafoe's character, he's a surgeon, and so he's like dissecting bodies and stuff, and at one point Bella comes in and she's like squish, and he's like, only the dead ones, and she goes over and you just have her stabbing this dead body in the eyes, and just like it's seemingly horrific, but it like diffuses it. It's just kind of funny. It does in this
world,
yes,
this weird grotesque world they've created.
Yes, which is what this film does so well, is it makes the grotesque a lot more palatable, and I think diffuses a lot of what would be horror, and it does that even in other, not every aspect, and because it still keeps it, and I think it has that good balance. But yeah, I think you have Godwin, this character that creates her, and he's like, oh, I did this thing, and this is actually like one of the like most like groundbreaking medical procedures, experiments ever, and it's like, I just want to marry her off. Like, I want to reintegrate her into this society that is just utterly oppressive and actively removing agency from women. So he's even from that, but then you have, remnants of her past life, in both Mark Ruffalo's character, the lawyer, who like we're mentioning earlier, his performance, and whether or not it, like, I will say,
it's so silly.
I'm not going to defend it and be like, oh, it's a great performance, because there is a moment like when he's first introduced, I could not stop thinking of Jared Leto's role in House of Gucci. Like it felt close to that a little bit.
I think I finally bought in, but the first scene he shows up, I was like, oh, this is one of those performances.
It is, and it ultimately works. But then Christopher Abbott's character, who's introduced far later, because she has to reconcile with her past, and I think it's appropriate that she does, that she faces her past, but she's her before she basically dies, and what leads to her reanimation as Bella. This character, she had a past life as I think Victoria maybe was her name, and which was appropriate because she is this just in Victorian society and like the perfect stand-in, and she ultimately committed suicide while she was pregnant. That's what allowed for the whole operation to get her the child. Basically she's her own child's mind, and it makes sense. The film makes it make sense, but it I don't know. I think that refacing that, and then again, her old husband being just an utter like warmonger who sees every single human being as like a product and a commodity, and he's like I think the servants are going to revolt. And like, I don't know why, and then he's just threatening them constantly
with a gun. Yeah. Well,
and
I think you mentioning the husband, that I think that's actually a really interesting thing it does, is because by us. So we were talking about that moment where you thought the movie is wrapping up, and then this other chapter.
And it's literally, I object to the end of this film.
Right. Well, it's important though, because tying into the nature versus nurture thing, it really does showcase like, okay, well, she was a different person when she was with this guy before, right? So it's a big contrast to but she's not. She has lived a clean, pure life without this guy, and here's who she is. So obviously, there's a difference in the person she is after death versus pre-death.
I don't think the film would have been able to complete its commentary on self-actualization that I think it was like reaching for until that was pretty necessary. I feel like that confrontation with the past, and I think it was done in a very succinct.
Who was she? Before we got introduced to this new iteration of her, and I think. Again, like I don't think you can kind of remove the gender aspect, but making this very unique and distinct, because if you think of like with thematically dealing with like Bride of Frankenstein, like she was created, you know what I mean, to supplement Frankenstein. Like they created her so he had a wife, and here it's interesting that as she navigates throughout the world, and yes, she's still living in an oppressive, chauvinistic kind of, male-dominated world, but at every step of the way, she's challenging those notions. Rejecting it and creating this new path forward for herself. And that's what's so interesting, is that he's allowing her, even though there are all these obstacles and challenges, she's not intimidated by any of it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like everything from sexuality to, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, and it's just fascinating that that he gave her room to breathe in that realm, and it becomes like this refreshing feminist kind of overtaking in a way where like, what if we gave women? What if we did remove the shame from these kinds of experiences? Right. And like you said, it makes so much of the grotesque. It's kind of playful, because even the sexuality in this, in some ways, it's not it's not even like particularly, or at least for me, not like titillating in that way, but because it's not being used for that, what I mean? Like, in some ways, like, she derives pleasure from certain people, but even some of the characters that she interacts with, that you would be like, ooh, you're like, cringy, and you think this is going to go in a really gross, and it surprisingly like doesn't. Like, even the grossest people that she has sex with, like, there's an interesting, interaction that she has with each character, each person. Because she's always in control of the situation. And I think that's what changes it. Because normally we're seeing the woman being violated in some way. And because that's removed here and the shame is removed here and her power is there, it doesn't, it takes that kind of, I don't know.
It's unique because there's like what setup is she's one of the Toms that enters the brothel is a man with his kids, and he wants to show his kids how to have sex, and it's still gross. Like, I'm not going to say it's not gross.
Yeah, it's pretty gross. Yeah,
it's gross, but like this, I think the power of this film is that it's able to like kind of diffuse that and turn that around into a moment where she again is asserting some kind of control, and I don't know. I just think that's
I mean,
impressive.
I think the perspective, as I could tell, that the film took was that she's using the prostitution as a tool, which as a tool to a means to get out of the situation she's in, which I mean, as the dude who's asked about, is this ethical? And that there's actually a decent number of women who say, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting position for the film to take in it, because it does show that she is owning her situation. She is there because she wants to be, and it's only a temporary means so that she can make enough money to leave the situation.
And we live in a culture now that is definitely like championing like sex work is like, you know, like
It's work.
You know, it is like I mean, if you know, if it's consensual and it's their choice, then who are we to say why they should or shouldn't do that? You know?
Chelsea, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say kind of how we talked about earlier, like Yorgos's work, how it's a little bit more bleak. I think that potentially Yorgos could have gone that tact with this one and ended it when her old husband showed up. And if the movie had ended with, okay, she's had this life, she's done this self-discovery, and it's like she has discovered she needs to conform. It could have ended with, I'm going to go with my husband, I'm going to go back to this life, and that is the reality we all face.
Yeah.
Could have been just as, but he went the other way, so.
Which frequently would have been bleaker. I mean, I guess if we didn't know who the guy was, you know. I think it's just a really powerful way to, I think, explore the sexuality and what that actually looks like when applied to like real world in terms of like human development, because that is her. She knows that it's pleasurable, and through that, she's able to start asking all these questions and learn about herself and what she likes and doesn't like. Gateway to her identity, I thought. What did you guys think about how this film utilizes that episodic chapter structure to kind of showcase different stages of her maturity? Because I thought it was pretty neat, because you basically have there's like every time we go to a new chapter, she seems like she's evolved more from the previous chapter, because she in that first chapter she can barely speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, in the visual, normally I don't like because this one does also feature like abrupt like title cards. What would be the word for title card? And in most cases, I kind of think that's a little bit. I think of like was this the last podcast we were on together, Chelsea? Was it the Zack Snyder cut of? Because you were on that one,
Yeah,
right?
I was,
but I like that one has like such like just abrupt, title cards that say nothing. And this film, normally I'm like kind of reluctant to embrace that, but in this film, I think those like you have her like floating amongst a fetus, and then you've got like her like lounging on a bisected brain, and as she starts to grow a little bit more and more, and then I think with those cuts you do start to see slight. Except one, and I'll explain it with the change to color. Like normally at first the cinematic, you have a lot of like fisheye lenses, you have a lot of very narrow framing, and then it starts to expand, it starts to get a little bit bigger, it starts to get more vast, and then you do have an abrupt shift to color when the first time she has sex, and like I get it, and it maybe that demanded an abrupt change because sexuality was going to become such a big part of this film, but for me I felt like I wish that was a little bit more progressive, but all in all, it still does a big not progressive, but more gradual. And like, I think all in all, it does a really good job of conveying that cognitive development and again, that actualization that she starts to bring. And then by the final act, you do have, full in color, fully wide angle, no fisheye lens anymore. And I think that works really well from the film aesthetically. I think it does a lot to carry what this film is about. So overall, I like those transitions, and I think those title cards do kind of help. But I also wonder if it necessarily needed them. And I like them because they're just like, it's eye fodder a lot. It just looks cool, and it's like it's only a glimpse, so you get this like weird surrealist dreamscape.
I've come around to that sort of language, the title cards. You don't want to use it in every film, but I think especially one that's structured in a film similar to this, and if it's implemented well, I think it's a pretty nice touch. I mean, I was trying to think. I feel like there's a couple of movies I've seen recently I was going through that have like the chapter breakup. Like The Hunger Games does in fact do that, the title chapter segment thing.
Doesn't Killers of the Flower Moon do it too? I feel like it maybe does
a little bit.
Yeah, it's not consistent, but it's there. It's there for sure.
Scorsese does it in a lot of his movies. He did it in The Irishman also. One that did not do it super well, in my opinion, recently was The Holdovers. They aren't doing chapters as much as they're doing like they're counting the days, but then it felt like they forgot in the second half of the movie. They're like, and they come back at the very end. No, we were counting the days. So I mean, it can be well used, but I think here it works. It worked really well for a lot of reasons. One of being that it's not just a gimmick where they throw tiles at the cards, that you see an evolution, her evolution, but also stylistically there's choices made in the production that differ from the previous chapter. Chelsea, any thoughts on the episodic structure?
Yeah. So I think because we treat development as episodes, right? I mean, if you're an infant, you're a child, you're an adolescent, you're a teen, you're an adult, and I think right now, especially because of the conversation, just right or not, over a lot of like the books in schools and things like that, like you should not be learning about these things until you are this age, and you are at this stage of your development. I think that it works really well in here because of how we treat developmental milestones, and each of those title cards and those sections are essentially almost that way. We're seeing different things happen in each one that are culminating in her maturation.
And we're dealing with the evolution of a character in a very specific way. And so I think that those title cards symbolically work really well with the story. And I agree, visually they're just fun. And in general, I'm also not a huge fan of title cards unless it's implemented very well. And here I think it is.
I did find myself, I'm like, please keep that shot for a little bit longer.
There's so much, like you could get lost looking at it. Like, where are we? Where are we going with this? And I'm sure on rewatch we'll be able to tell, stylistically what's going on in that little. Well,
there's also a geographical location too. For those.
Yeah. Because most of them are just saying like, London, Lebanon, wherever we're going, like so. But and then we can at one point there'll be think pieces about London. Let's talk about London's chapter. Let's talk about what's going on. You know what I mean? Like, and so it does give you kind of a quick reference point to what each chapter is kind of going to delve into. So,
I thought it was really, really neat. Again, maybe because Daniel, I used to think like you, I'm like, it's kind of intrusive when they put the things on the screen, but I don't know. My brain, it helps me like, okay, here's where I am in the story. Reset. I don't know, it just changes the pace for me a little bit. I don't know. I'm coming around to it, I guess. And this is I thought this is a really creative way to implement it. Let's talk a little bit about the historical fantasy setting. I mean, I say it's a combination of not cyberpunk, steampunk, but also historical fiction we talked about earlier.
A little bit of gothic horror.
How does this setting sort of lend itself to this sort of like almost like mystical setting lend itself to the story we're experiencing?
I think it's so integral to why this movie works, because I think if this had been set in real world stakes, this would be very bleak and very, you know what I mean, maybe even heavy handed. You know what I mean? Like, so I think the fantastical elements is a really, interesting lens into understanding it. It works in the same way that animation does for kids. You know what I mean? How you put them in these fantastical settings to kind of chew on some very timely themes, movies like Inside Out, for example. Like, how can we talk about depression that in a way that a kid will understand, even if they don't know the term yet, but they'll understand like what that's like. Finding an interesting way to dissect the complexity of a really, meaty topic like that. And here, again, dealing with agency, female autonomy, and like how, it puts it in this very, we have a lot of ways into understanding it visually, ways to understanding it on a human level. So it explores it in many different ways. And so I think that the fantastical element is the strength of the film in terms of conveying all of its themes, a lot of meaty themes at the same time, so.
Yeah, and I think the world building you're getting at this, like the environment that she is placed in and that specific fantasy setting, I think really speaks to who Bella is out the gate as a character as she starts to find this, who she is in her entirety now and the wholeness. But everywhere she looks, there's a reflection of what she is, which is an amalgam. I mean, right out the gate, you see like, what is it, like a Boston Terrier crossed with a goose,
right?
And all of these like kind of Arthur Gordon mentioned it, the Dr. Moreau-esque setting, and then you see, the gag with the horse, the visual, which was probably one of the best visual gags of the film, the horse crossed with the carriage, but it's like literally a horse head on top. And again, it's these things that are melded together, and she too is like this meld together. Unfortunately, the other thing you see that's melded together, which is actually very, very real, is fucking assholes crossed with high-ranking socialites and military leaders. That's the one that hits a little close to home, but I think that idea of manipulating the world for science or fancy is like a part of the weird space that Bella both finds herself, but I think ultimately pierces and again becomes a fully formed, her own distinct being, despite her origin. And I think the fantasy setting really helps carry that idea. And again, especially with all of the amalgams in the word. Like at first it's weird. It actually is like unsettling. And I think this kind of speaks to where you mentioned how the film finally clicks like halfway through. And I get that because at first it just feels like, wow, we have this like, again, for lack of a better term, a kind of like fairy tale princess. And I think that's visually conveyed with like Bella and her initial like outfitting. She has those massive, what's the word for shoulder pads? But like, is it like pauldrons or something like that? And
probably.
I think, that, and then you see
Chelsea, do you know what those are called?
No, not off the top of my head now.
Yeah,
They'll probably call that Daniel. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, let's go.
Probably. Yeah.
But it's that, and then again, these very grotesque creatures and Willem Dafoe's Godwin at the same time, and again, how that slowly morphs into something that's really just like not only like her holistic self, but also just wholesome ultimately at the same time. And it's in the final shot of the film when you have a lot of like, at least one thing that's frankly pretty scary, in that somebody has had their brain switched with an animal. And,
Right. It was hilarious.
But it was hilarious. And it was like, oh, everything is right in the world. Yeah. But yeah, no. I think that fantasy setting just helps kind of get that idea across of being an amalgam and being quote unquote like unnatural, and then slowly making that natural and reclaiming her origin.
Yeah, definitely fits her journey. The whole world feels a lot more grounded by the. I mean, yes, you still have flipped heads.
It's like all there. Like you've got
it's still the same, but the way we see it is definitely significantly closer to our reality than the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
Chelsea, what are your thoughts about the use of this setting?
I think it is always amusing to me how we have to be in a place in a fantasy setting for the equality and the like transcension of gender roles to occur. Yorgos still falls into some of the issues the fantasy still has, where it's you have the people of color tend to be guidance more so than the main characters.
Very auxiliary.
We do have that in here. So it always
the spiritual Negro is what we call that in a lot of movies.
But you have to have fantasy in order to have these conversations, because real world doesn't lend itself to them, because we can't see past.
We get too jaded. We're too jaded to actually have a meaningful conversation. Well, like that sounds great in theory, but ...
Yeah. So you have to have a movie like this in order to really point out how backwards and just like how much we cannot transcend our own
realities.
Yeah. It is upsetting that women are only able to work out their stuff in fantasies.
I mean, women are always in charge in fantasy. Let's be real.
Yeah. I think it's almost to kind of to trick the audience into, because like you said, if it was a straightforward thing, oh, this is feminist crap, but like, you know what I mean? Like, but if you put it in this fantastical setting, then it's like, it's weirdly like more, digestible or
for men.
Yeah. Women were like, we get this. Like, this is like, okay,
like,
whatever you need to get there, whatever you guys need to get there to understand this. But yeah, I agree. It's an interesting entry point. And I think because, the way it presents itself in a way that is complex, that is imaginative in a way, I mean, I hate to say, it doesn't, because I think, again, if it was so straightforward, then we would feel like we were being preached at, even if we needed to be. But it finds an interesting way into our psyche to look at things from a fantastical lens,
If it had been set in real world, it would have ended with her going back to her husband.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, have you guys seen White Lotus? I mean, come on. You know what I mean? That's kind of how it would have ended. You're like, man, this is awful. This is terrible. But also, I like money, and I need to have the money for the means, sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah. I don't have much more to add. I did appreciate how, again, going back to the aesthetic evolution, we've already referenced a couple points though. But the world she's in feels the closest to our reality. Like people, the way it's shot, the way people are dressed, the way everyone talks, which I think is a good sort of coming of age thing. You start where everything is fantastic. Everything you see is fantastical. The horses are fantastical. The boats are fantastical. And I felt that like every chapter we get closer and closer towards our reality. Obviously not 100%, or it's all very heightened, but we're seeing stuff like the magic steamboat in the middle of the movie, and you're not really seeing as much. Even the carriages at the end, you're just seeing kind of how they were. Yeah. Right. So I kind of view it as the this is her evolution as an adult. You start life big eyes, everything's larger than life, and the older you get, the more kind of grounded and reasonable it all becomes. So just again, really really neat choice in terms of how it evolves from more of the fantasy closer to the reality. I do want to talk a little about, and here's actually a qualm I had in the movie. I did not say in the spoiler-free section because I didn't want to get ahead of myself. But this film does connect the struggle of gender and to class infrastructure. My criticism is I don't think it says enough, but it's there. There's absolutely no denying it. The way she has sympathy for the people off the boat, right? Obviously, they're studying communism in the university, and so there is some of that in the text. So I just want to get you guys' take. I did not think it said enough about it, though. I felt like there was more to be said about just how the class infrastructure actually is an additional oppressor. And again, they kind of get at it a little bit, but it's not as clear. I mean, the gender
not separate. They're integrated in a way, and they kind of influence each other.
Whereas the gender being the most important part, I would argue, but that one definitely soaks up a lot of the air thematically if you're looking at the connection between the two, I thought. Because again, we really only get one scene where you're seeing people who are in poverty, like starvation. You obviously get the brothel scenes, but even the brothel looks kind of comfortable relative to like some of the people off the boat. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that at you guys. What do you guys think about how the film explores the class struggle with gender?
I think that it explores it whenever it's talking about the polite society.
Yeah.
Women and people are freed from polite society when they have exited the class requirements for polite society.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is very much what happens whenever she gives away all the money and now they're poor and then they get kicked off the boat and all this. So, but she gets to take that agency because she is not bound by the trappings of polite society that says prostitution is bad.
Right.
So she's able to engage in those activities that would be seen as not polite society.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know how well it, like, as you're saying, Caleb, how it like connects those two threads. But I did.
This is gonna sound awful because I don't like misery porn either. But I don't feel it was not clear to me in the movie that the people who were outside of the polite society had it that bad. If that makes sense.
And I think that potentially he was trying to make the point, not that they didn't have it bad, but they did have it better because
they're not a part of
they are not a polite society, because they are able to behave more naturally, transcend those things.
That's how I saw it. And I also felt like what I do like about that sequence in particular is that I feel like this movie is very empathetic in what it's saying about this woman's journey and this woman's experience. And I think that that's a moment where, again, like where she's extending this kind of empathetic gesture that's showing more of her humanity as this process is going on. And, as I don't think it makes a strong enough point about class, but I do think it shows us another shade of her. Yeah, for sure. Of her, of this kind of beating heart she's starting to have for the human experience and why do I get these things and these people don't. And, but the same thing with likening it to like, why do women have to do this and men get to, you know what I mean? Like there's a correlation there. It's not very strong.
There's not a huge exploration about like what makes a rich person rich or a poor person poor and how, and what it is.
Enough for the class thing to land emotionally, but it does work from a characterization standpoint.
Agreed.
Well, and I wonder how bloated the film might be if it tried to tackle both, because I think as gender relates to class and kind of this deconstruction of chivalry, it does it pretty well. But yeah, it does feel like the scene off the boat when you see, people starving and you see an infant funeral for a moment. It's very, it does feel kind of glossed over a little bit.
I guess it just feels like a scene that like, if you're going to put that in the movie, I want you to do more with it, I guess is my
That's what, and I would absolutely agree. I think it might be a weakness of the film in that it kind of just brushes against it, but it doesn't. It only needs Bella to see it for a moment, so she's like aware of it for the sake of her character. But it doesn't feel like an intrinsic part of the film. It doesn't feel like it really is carried much further than that. And then at the same time too, and I feel weird saying this, because when I use the word privilege, I don't mean like Bella in her entirety is like in a privileged position, because she isn't, when you take it from a gender perspective. But even when she's like, you know, they wind up in Paris and they're without money because she gave all of Mark Ruffalo's character, I can't think of his name, like Duncan. Wedderburn. Yes. She gives all of his money that was earned, you know, probably not.
It was gambling.
It was gambling, yeah. And then you think of like what his profession was, like a lawyer. So like he probably didn't, and he was like a terrible lawyer. Like there's that sequence when he's introduced. And
he's also a con man. So I'm not actually completely convinced he actually was a lawyer, because they also comment on how his grammar was bad.
He was looking at the contract and he's like, there are so many typos here. And he's like, yes. And he's like not even there listening. But like, I don't know. It still feels like she has somewhat of a again, like a privileged position in that sequence. Like, even though she still is moneyless and has to go to the brothel. And again, like, it's weird. I just feel like maybe trying to take a stab at classism in that sense, in the you know, the 1% style.
Because what did she say at the end? Like, whenever I think she's in like the yellow after she's given the money away.
Yeah.
And he's on the bench. She's like, you gave all our money away. Now what are we going to do? She's like, well, now you're liberated from this fact that you have all these luxuries and things. Now we have a new way of moving and navigating through the world. And and she's not cynical about that.
No.
In that way, because she doesn't necessarily see a huge value in that.
She disregards. She transcends the polite society.
Yes, exactly. It's like we don't need all these things, you know. And that is an interesting stake. Like, she's happy with little,
and she's okay with that, despite seeing what she just saw, which was which was the people. It was in Greece, I think, is when they're at, and yeah, I don't know. Something about that doesn't fully click, but at the same time, it's like, how do you make that?
Yeah,
work,
and I don't want to I'm not going
to tell
armchair direct. It's one of those when I include that, and then they also have a reference when she's going to school for education about how they're learning about communism or whatever, and I'm like, okay, there's something here if they don't really bring it all the way home for me.
And perhaps he doesn't. And perhaps he doesn't fully understand it.
No,
and like, he wants to address it, but he doesn't fully get it.
But there is a clear connection between. I mean, we talk about systems, right? There's one of the systems being class, a social economic class, but then also gender being a part of that. And I don't want to think the movie fails. It's just one of those things where I'm like, oh, you're raising this flag, and I'm making a connection in my brain. I'm like, all right, so where are we going with that?
Yeah, it's one of the many cool ideas it has in its brain that it just doesn't go far enough with.
I think we should. I would love to see explore, and I mean, whether this film or another, I would definitely love to see another director work. It's a great idea, I guess, but it's not fully realized.
I think that really it served one small point with the nature and nurture thing, and I think that's really possibly all he wanted out of that, which is she sees this, and so again, that divergence of nature and nurture is that nature says that we should act. And so she acted. Whereas nurture, as in polite society, says, well, those people got themselves where they are.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well.
And so she is transcending and saying, well, no, we need to act. Sorry, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's a powerful scene, by the way. I want to acknowledge that. Well, do we, any other thoughts on Poor Things that anything we haven't hit on that you guys want to call out before we wrap up today's conversation?
If you're looking for something interesting, just like go watch it. But I think that the sex aspect, really, honestly, for how much sex is in that movie, it's not sexy sex.
No, not at all.
So it's very clinical. And I think if you can approach it in that way, I think it's probably a lot of people can watch it if they're just watching it.
It has utility. Yeah. It has utility outside of just being arousing or being.
I really don't think it's ever designed to be arousing.
No, it's not.
And it's not. And it doesn't feel objectifying either. You know, which as many naked bodies are in this movie, I think in the same way. Like, I mean, I hate to liken it to like a movie like Shame. You know, where sex is used in a very specific way.
Yeah.
And it's not for eroticism. It's to convey another, you know, to convey a issue,
trauma that
he has. And here, you know, it's enlightenment for her. You know what I mean? Like, what's pleasure? Like, am I allowed to have it? Why is there shame attached to it?
There is this, like, and I will say, like, whatever one of the slight touches, and this I think speaks to Stone's performance very strongly, is when she is having sex. It's like a inquisitive look. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she's pondering. She's not like, it's more wondering, and it's more trying to understand this thing, not so much like this is just, utterly pleasure or debaucherous or anything like that. It's more of just like, it conveys that of like,
It's a part of the human
understanding.
experience.
And the
Yes.
benefit of her having a childlike mind in a fully developed woman's body is
Well, it enables
Which
you
is
to
still-
call out all the BS of the polite side.
exactly.
Why is it this way? Why is this
She's
this
not
way? Well, I'm not going to do
indoctrinated.
that.
She's not indoctrinated, so she gets to act on what comes freely to her.
What makes sense?
What makes sense, and before all these concepts start to come in and attribute, like, this is where you're supposed to go, and this is how you're supposed to think, and this is how you're supposed to talk in these settings, and she's like, why? Which I love the scene when we forget that we're not even talking about how funny this movie really
yeah.
is.
And it is pretty funny. Yeah.
The lines are very funny, like the scene where she's spitting out food, and she's like, why should I keep chewing it if it's revolting? Because it's not polite. This lady made this food, and then I should go punch that baby because it's irritating me. Like, the impulse. I just find all of that very, very amusing.
Also, deliver the typical Yorgos Lanthimos line delivery, and that's consistent in all his movies. Where you're just like, what? It's so deadpan. Everything's so deadpan.
Yeah.
Well, and there was like, there is this one line, and there is this weirdness, just to mention it a little bit, of like, again, Robbie Youssef's character, like wanting to definitely being very attracted to Bella, despite knowing that, like, at the time when he made, like, by that point, she has the mind of like a 3 or 4 year old. And I think there is some weirdness in that, but it does lead to a line where he asks Willem Dafoe's character Godwin, like, have you ever thought about, like having sex with her or something like that? And he's like, are you insane? He's like, the amount of like energy it would take for me to have an orgasm would like offset all of London's infrastructure or something like that. And I'm like, that's such a good line. But yeah, there's a little bit of weirdness there, but I think the film takes that weirdness and actually says something with it. That's pretty productive.
For sure. And the sense of humor is very notable.
Yeah.
Last thing I'm just going to say, Willem Dafoe. He's amazing. Yeah. He deserves an Oscar. I think between this and the Lighthouse, I'm just like, man, this guy can just show up and just deliver these crazy impressive performances that no one else can do. But because people are used to him showing up so well every time, that he never gets the credit,
he grounds it no matter what he's playing, so.
Willem is kind of, I don't want to, this is a weird comparison. He's kind of like Hugh Grant right now. But William's showing up in the good stuff. And Hugh Grant over here is like, oh, somebody sent me a script, I'm going to be in it. Because he's been in some weird stuff this year.
And let's not forget he's going to be an Oompa Loompa.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I think he just gets the script. It's like, yeah.
I appreciate Hugh Grant as a performer, so I don't want to sell him short. He's very good at certain things. I think Defoe has been showing up and hitting home runs with very difficult material longer than Hugh Grant.
And also even when he's in it for a moment, because he was in Asteroid City too, and it was just momentary, but it's so it's like one of the most memorable films.
Florida Project, yep.
Kind of steals away the humanity of that movie, but because he can be charismatic and he can be cunning, and you know what I mean. He can play both of those characters, both of those aspects of a character very well. Sometimes at the same time, So, and here he's this monstrous looking character, but he's actually very humane and charismatic, and so I love that. I love that contrast, So
yeah. Anyway, give him the Oscar.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning into this week's review. Maybe you want to keep up with our guests today to find out where they're doing cool things online. Daniel Bokemper, I'll start with you.
Yeah, catch me on the Cinematropolis as well. Not too long ago, wrote a piece on Killers of the Flower Moon, a character analysis. But also flickattack.com. I'm posting reviews there, fairly short reviews there regularly. I think my most recent one is either The Killer, David Fincher's new film, but I think it's actually the Argentinian film. I always want to say Where Evil Lurks, but it's When Evil Lurks, the possession film that is a roller coaster ride and one of the most unique and I think powerful horror films in a year where there are several horror films that are strong, but bare minimum, probably miles above what might be the most popular possession film in The Exorcist Believer.
I would not say popular.
No, not popular. hey, no, but name recognition. Popular by meaning like people recognize it, and the most people probably saw it as, over like Talk to Me, maybe would be the other one. And then
I bet I'm going to go run the box office numbers after this podcast. I wouldn't be surprised if Talk to Me makes more money.
Really? Good. That makes my heart happy.
Yeah. Exorcist had a huge opening. Oh, I say huge. It had a solid opening weekend, but dropped off very heavily. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. Daniel Bokemper, Flick Attack, Cinematropolis, Laron Chapman.
I don't have a cool place to house all of my reviews, but I do write them with intense regularity on Letterboxd. So you can follow me on Letterboxd at black_Cinna_man.
Check them out, ladies and gentlemen. Great reviews. Chelsea Ratterman.
Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter because I refuse to call it X at Cinephile Chels. Actually, it's my handle across all my platforms. So come have a chat. We've got movies, we've got music, we've got politics, we got everything. Just come chat.
Chelsea Takes. Check them out there. And of course, you can follow me over on all the things. Yeah, Letterboxd, Instagram, Still X, C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk, or everything we do over at the Cinematropolis at thecinematropolis.com. And hey, please give us a rating and a review. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We'll catch you again next time in our review of Hayao Miyazaki's The Boy and the Heron. Very excited about this one. Until next time.